The question is simple. Was Job suffering a punishment from God? People have asked this for thousands of years. It gets right to the heart of what we think about God, about fairness, and about pain. The story of Job looks this question square in the eye. To really get at an answer, we have to look at the story from the beginning, not just when the suffering starts, but before it. The book opens by telling us who Job was. He was a man from the land of Uz, and he was blameless and upright. He feared God and turned away from evil. The story doesn't just say he was a good guy, it says he was the best, the greatest of all the people of the East. He had a huge family, tons of livestock, and many servants. He was rich, respected, and righteous. This point is critical. The author wants us to know, beyond any doubt, that Job is not a secret sinner. He is a genuinely good man. Then the scene changes. It moves from earth to a sort of heavenly court. God is there, and the angelic beings, the sons of God, come to present themselves. Among them is a figure called Satan. In Hebrew, this name means the accuser or the adversary. This isn't necessarily the red-horned devil of later tradition. He acts more like a cosmic prosecuting attorney whose job is to test the integrity of humanity. God points out Job. He says to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil." God himself is vouching for Job's character. The accuser's response is cynical. He asks, does Job fear God for no reason? He suggests Job's piety is just a business transaction. Job is good because God has been good to him. He has a hedge of protection around him, his family, his property. The accuser argues that if you take all that away, Job will curse God to his face. It's a direct challenge. Is Job's faith genuine, or is it just a byproduct of his comfortable life? So God agrees to the test. He tells the accuser, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So God gives permission, but with a limit. Right away, this framing tells us something important. And Job's suffering, at its origin, is not a punishment. It's not God looking down, seeing a hidden sin in Job, and deciding to discipline him. It's the result of a cosmic wager, a test of faith initiated by the accuser. Job has no idea this conversation ever happened. He is a participant in a drama he cannot see. This is the central piece of information that we, the readers, have, but Job and his friends do not. And this missing piece of the puzzle explains everything that follows. The bad news comes all at once. One messenger arrives, then another, then another. His oxen and donkeys are stolen, the servants killed. His sheep are burned up by a fire from God. His camels are carried off in a raid. And finally, the worst news. A mighty wind collapsed the house where his 10 children were feasting, and they are all dead. In a single day, Job loses his wealth and his children, everything. Job's reaction is profound. He tears his robe, shaves his head, and falls to the ground. But he doesn't curse God, where he worships. He says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The narrator adds a crucial line. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. The test, it seems, is over. Job has passed. But the story isn't finished. The heavenly court scene happens a second time. God, again, points out Job's integrity even after all he has lost. The accuser is not convinced. He says, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." The accuser ups the ante. He claims Job only maintained his faith because his own health was spared. True loyalty is only tested when your own body is in agony. God agrees again with another limit. He is in your hand, only spare his life. So Job is struck with terrible sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He sits in ashes, scraping himself with a piece of pottery. His suffering is now total. It is financial, emotional, and physical. Even his wife tells him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job rebukes her. "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" And again, the narrator confirms, in all this Job did not sin with his lips. So, if we stop the story right here, the answer to our question is a clear and simple no. Job's suffering was not a punishment from God. The book goes out of its way to establish his innocence and show us the real reason for his calamity, a test he knows nothing about. But the story doesn't stop there. Most of the book is not about the test itself, but about the human attempt to make sense of the suffering. Job's three friends arrive: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They see their friend in misery, and for 7 days and 7 nights they sit with him in silence. They are so shocked by his pain that they can't speak. This is perhaps their finest moment. But then, Job breaks the silence. He doesn't curse God, but he curses the day he was born. He launches into a raw, painful lament, wishing he had never existed. This cry of despair is what finally gets his friends talking. And what they say forms the very heart of the suffering as punishment argument. Eliphaz speaks first. He's the most gentle, at least initially. He starts by asking, "Think now who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off?" His logic is straightforward. Good people don't suffer like this. Bad people do. Therefore, Job, you must have done something wrong. He suggests Job should appeal to God and confess his sin. If he does, God will restore him. This is what theologians call retribution theology. God is a fair judge who runs the world according to a strict system of justice. The righteous prosper, and the wicked suffer. It's a neat, tidy, and predictable world. Bildad speaks next. He is more direct. He tells Job his children must have sinned against God, and that's why they died. He accuses Job of being a windbag. He appeals to tradition and the wisdom of the past. "For we are but of yesterday, and know nothing," he says. The ancestors knew that God does not pervert justice. The formula is unbreakable. If you are suffering, you are guilty. He compares Job to a weed that withers without water. Zophar is the harshest of all. He is completely without compassion. He tells Job he is getting less than he deserves. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. He is certain that Job is hiding some great wickedness. If he sees no shades of gray. The world is black and white. You are either with God and blessed, or against God and cursed. Since Job is clearly cursed, he must be a wicked man. For chapter after chapter, this debate rages. The friends repeat their basic argument with increasing frustration and cruelty. They start with hints and suggestions, and by the end they are openly accusing Job of being a terrible sinner, an oppressor of the poor and the orphan. Their theology demands a reason for Job's suffering, and the only reason they can imagine is sin. To them, a world where an innocent person could suffer so horribly is a world without a just God. And that is a terrifying thought. So, to protect their idea of God, they must condemn their friend. Their system of belief is more important to them than Job's reality. But Job refuses to accept their logic. This is what makes him a hero. He pushes back with all his might. He knows their formula. He grew up with it too. But his own experience has shattered it. He says, "I am blameless. I regard not myself. I loathe my life." He knows he's a good man. He's not perfect. No one is. But he hasn't committed some great evil that would justify this level of torment. Job's speeches are a torrent of grief, anger, confusion, and raw honesty. He argues directly with God. He feels like God has become his enemy, hunting him down for sport. He says, "You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand you persecute me." He wishes he could have his day in court to plead his case before God. He knows he is righteous, and he wants God to explain why this is happening. He doesn't want a formula, he wants a relationship, he wants an answer from God himself. Job's great struggle is that he, like his friends, believes in a just God. But unlike his friends, he cannot ignore the evidence of his own life. His friends resolve the conflict by declaring Job a sinner. Job cannot do this. So he is left with a terrible contradiction. A just God is treating him unjustly. He questions God's character, his fairness, his very management of the universe. He sees that in the real world, the wicked often prosper while the righteous suffer. The friends' neat formula simply doesn't match reality. So, who is right? The friends who claim Job's suffering is a punishment, or Job, who claims it is not. After the three friends fall silent, a new character appears. A young man named Elihu. He has been listening the whole time, and he is angry at both Job and his friends. He thinks the friends failed to prove Job's guilt, and he thinks Job was wrong to justify himself rather than God. Elihu offers a slightly more sophisticated argument. He suggests that suffering might not be purely punitive, but also corrective. God uses pain to get our attention, to teach us, to keep us from pride, and to draw us closer to him. It's like a warning sign, or a form of loving discipline. This is a step beyond the crude "you sinned, so you suffer" logic of the friends. It introduces the idea that suffering can have a purpose beyond punishment. And yet, it's still an attempt to explain everything. It's still a system. Elihu, like the others, assumes he can understand and explain God's motives. He still operates on the assumption that suffering is directly tied to the behavior or needs of the person experiencing it. Finally, after 37 chapters of human beings talking about God, God himself speaks. He doesn't come in a gentle whisper. He answers Job out of a whirlwind, a storm. This is a display of immense, untamed power. And what does God say? Does he answer Job's question? Does he explain the wager with the accuser? Does he list Job's sins or confirm his innocence? He does none of these things. God never once says, Job, here is why you suffered. Instead, God puts Job on trial. He cross-examines Job with a long series of questions that have nothing to do with Job's personal situation. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Have you entered into the storehouses of the snow? God talks about the wonders of the cosmos, the weather, the animal kingdom. He describes the mountain goat giving birth, the wild donkey running free, the powerful horse charging into battle. He spends 2 whole chapters describing 2 massive, terrifying creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These are not cuddly zoo animals. They represent the wild, chaotic, dangerous, and powerful aspects of creation that are far beyond human control. What is the point of all this? God is not just flexing his creative muscles. He is fundamentally reframing the entire debate. Job and his friends were arguing about a small, human-centered world of cause and effect, of sin and punishment. They assumed the universe revolved around human justice. God responds by showing Job a universe that is infinitely larger, more complex, and more mysterious than he ever imagined. God's point is not that might makes right. He is not bullying Job into submission. He is showing Job the limits of human wisdom. Job demanded an explanation for his suffering based on a human scale of justice. God reveals that his wisdom in running the universe operates on a scale so vast that Job cannot possibly comprehend it. The world is not a simple moral machine where good deeds always result in blessings and bad deeds always result in curses. It is a wild, beautiful, dangerous, and mysterious place held together by a wisdom that is far beyond humanity's grasp. By showing Job the untamable Leviathan, God is saying that he presides over a world that contains chaos and danger that he does not always shield humanity from. The existence of suffering does not mean that God is unjust or has lost control. It means the world is more complex than the simple formulas of retribution theology can explain. After hearing God's speech, Job's perspective is completely changed. He says, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. He goes on, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you, therefore I despise myself, and repent in dust and ashes. What does Job repent of? He doesn't repent of some secret sin that the friends were right about all along. He repents of his arrogance, he repents of trying to put God in a box, of demanding answers from a position of ignorance, of speaking about divine matters that were far beyond his comprehension. He moves from knowing about God to a direct personal encounter with God. And in that encounter, the need for an explanation dissolves. The presence of God becomes the answer. The story ends with an epilogue that gives us the final, definitive verdict on the punishment question. God speaks to Eliphaz, the first friend. He says, My wrath is kindled against you and your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. This is a stunning reversal. The men who spent the entire book defending God's justice are the ones who get a divine rebuke. And Job, the man who questioned God, who accused God of being cruel, who shook his fist at heaven, is the one God commends. Why? Because Job was honest. He spoke his reality from the depths of his pain. The friends, on the other hand, spoke false platitudes. They defended a simplistic, mechanical version of God that wasn't true. They flattened the mystery of God into a predictable formula, and in doing so, they misrepresented him. God then instructs the friends to make a sacrifice and says that Job will pray for them, and God will accept Job's prayer. Job, the supposed sinner, becomes the mediator for his pious accuser friends. Finally, God restores Job's fortunes. He gives him double the livestock he had before. He gives him another 10 children. He lives a long, full life. This restoration is sometimes tricky for modern readers. It can look like a neat, happy ending that proves the friend's theology was right after all. Be good or repent, and you'll get your stuff back. But that misses the point of the whole book. The restoration is not a payment for Job's suffering. It's a sign of God's grace and sovereignty. It shows that God's ultimate desire is for blessing and relationship, even after a period of profound and unexplained pain. The point is not that if you suffer patiently, you'll get rich. The point is that God is present, God is sovereign, and God's story for us doesn't end in the ashes. So, let's return to the original question. Was Job suffering a punishment from God? The book of Job shouts a resounding no. It was not a punishment for a specific sin. The text is explicit about this from the very first chapter. The entire narrative is designed to demolish that very idea. The friends who insist that suffering must be a punishment are the ones who are ultimately condemned by God for speaking wrongly about him. The book of Job does not give us a neat answer to the question of why we suffer. In fact, its main purpose is to teach us that there often isn't a neat answer. It forces us to live with the mystery. It tells us that the world is not a simple transaction. It tells us that bad things can and do happen to good people. And it tells us that trying to explain someone's pain with a simple formula is not only unhelpful, it is an offense against God. What the book offers instead of an answer is a presence. It suggests that in the middle of our darkest moments, when there are no explanations, it is still possible to encounter God. It validates our anger, our questions, and our cries of protest. It shows us a God who is big enough to handle our honesty. And it teaches that true faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting the character of God when none of the answers make sense. Job's suffering was a test, a mystery, a tragedy, but it was not a punishment.